Welcome, 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 welcome to Evening Musings with Miss Martin. Today we are musing on writing. We are musing on writing with the one, the only, the Viking extraordinaire. It is Stig Kenobi.
The Obi-Wan.
The, the Obi-Wan Kenobi, correct. The Obi-Wan Viking.
The one and
And
only Obi-Wan.
okay.
I
The
don't
one
know.
and
Hello there.
Hello there. Welcome and welcome to everyone in the chat. Always great to see everybody. Yeah, we're going to be talking today about nonfiction writing. That's the kind of writing that I do. And I know that, Steve, you have done some nonfiction writing. I didn't know if you wanted to share a little.
Well, to be fair, it was fiction, wasn't it? I wrote fiction. Uh, you know,
That is correct. I stand corrected. Yes. You, yes.
I know it. I know what I wrote wasn't true.
What you wrote wasn't true. Well, and that's I think what we want to get into a little bit is because part of what you do when you do write certain things, I think that you certainly kind of write it as though it is true, even if it is not true. Well, Steve, why don't you take it over? Why don't you tell me what kind of writing have you do, or what kind that interests you?
Well, I've always been a fantasy buff.
Mhm.
Um, I find when I read fantasy, it gives my mind a vacation because I'm reading about a different world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And takes my mind away from the news or whatever. So it's I find it relaxing. And a few years ago, I used to work for a D&D company. So I wrote world building stuff and lore for that world. I did some adventure modules and stuff like that for D&D, which is basically you write a story with no main characters because that's what the players are supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
So you write a lot of optional story points based on whatever you think the players might do, and then there's a conclusion to the story and all that. Yeah, so I pretty much did what every fantasy writers start off with. You create a world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, as fleshed out as you can. So yeah, and I've been writing. Well, I've done two half fantasy novels as well, but I gave them up because I thought after a while they were shit. And the other one I stopped because self discipline is a thing, and in these days with social media and so many distractions, it's very hard to stay focused.
Oh, interesting. So you do have a little bit of background in fantasy, and you said that it was something that you decided to abandon.
Uh,
Um,
yeah, it's um, it's I guess I've studied writing more than I've written because I've probably read like 20 books several times on writing. I've spoken to writers a lot about writing, so I understand the process.
mhm,
And uh, plotting a novel is something I can do, but self-discipline, right,
mhm,
is a different thing entirely.
mhm. Yes, for sure. And sometimes I found that having a deadline is the best kind of discipline, though one would argue that's not self-discipline. Of course, it's because it's due, and no matter what, it is due. And if you want to get it done, you need to meet your deadline.
Yeah, yeah, and that's absolutely a thing. But if you're writing a novel and it's your first one,
Mhm,
you don't have a deadline
that's true.
because there's no publisher pushing you, right?
Ah, okay. Yes, because you need to write it out and then perhaps solicit a publisher for your work. I like what you said about how you studied a lot of books on writing, and that was how you prepared for your craft, how you worked on your craft. Were there any particular books in mind that you found particularly compelling in that process?
Yeah, that there's several books on world building and stuff like that, right?
Mhm.
But the best book I've read about writing is one by Terry Brooks. It's called Sometimes the Magic Works, and everything in it I thought was great advice, and it all made perfect sense. But then again, not all writers are the same. So
Mhm.
what's good advice for me might be okay advice for someone else, right?
Mhm.
But if I had to recommend one book, that's the one.
Yeah, and what particularly perhaps would you want to share that was so compelling about it? What did Terry Brooks
Um,
have to say?
he wrote it in a natural way, so you got examples of why this and that is the advice he's giving, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, he explained it in a natural way, and it
Mhm.
was very understandable. And the book was also fun to read.
Mm,
That helps.
yeah,
It actually at no point did that book feel like any kind of lecture.
yeah, and I think that that's also an aspect of writing that sometimes perhaps is not always looked upon, which is if you're going to write something, you need to write something that's interesting, that's going to be accessible.
Yeah, and it's that old writing tip that write what you know,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
if if you don't know shit about it, how can you explain it to the reader, right?
Hmm. Yep.
So you need to be comfortable with I guess the setting the story is set in, and
Hmm.
the story, because I guess the central element of the story can't revolve around a life experience you never had, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, because I've never been a doctor, so I can't write a story based on how a doctor treats a patient or how that doctor solves, or cures cancer, right? I can't do that,
Hmm.
but I can have a doctor in a story. The for basic reasons as a side character, right? That if you
Yes.
uh, the hero is at the doctor's office and he's been shot, the doctor takes the bullet out and stitches it up, right? And says, "Hey, keep
Hmm.
keep the shoulder um, still for a month."
Hmm. Yeah. And welcome to all those in our chat. Always good to see you all. Time Prophet, Ara, I believe, Open Airlock Policy's been here, Fat Steven Seagal. And the Time Prophet has something to say here. He says that I have never been a scientist, but I had scientists in my book.
Yeah, but I bet you,
Yeah.
if you've never been a scientist, it would be very difficult to write a book from a scientist's point of view that involves complicated science.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's a
And
different
so,
beast.
yeah, that's a good point. So it needs to be something that you would actually know, or though now that I'm thinking about it, would a writer say, for example, if I, for some strange reason, wanted to do a book about a scientist, if I were to go and interview a lot of scientists, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Is it something that you think that a person could actually do that's
Yeah,
not their own? Could they fake it?
I guess you can, but would that be enough for a whole book? Because
Mm.
you'd also have to um, understand the science if that scientist character runs into a scientific problem.
Mm. Yeah. So No, I understand completely what you mean on there. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I want to go a little bit back to what you said from the beginning when you said that you had a background in Dungeons and Dragons and world building. I didn't know if you wanted to expound upon that.
Um, yeah, I wrote a big world thing. I had a guy do the guy I worked with did the map tremendously well,
Hmm.
talented fellow, and the map was designed as a real place because um, I see a lot of people that are new new at writing fantasy and stuff, right?
Hmm.
They do a cool map, but the map doesn't always make sense because sometimes a river would run two ways,
Yeah.
or in two directions and stuff like that. So even making a map is a bit of a thing you need to learn because rivers usually run from a mountain, right?
Hmm.
Water always runs down, and water will always run out from the lowest points of as the lowest exit points.
Yes.
So usually, if there's a lake, you don't have two rivers coming out of it. You have one.
Yeah, and that's also an aspect I think of world building that when things fall apart in a story, it's usually something as simple as that, but that's a symptom of something larger. That's what I always say. It's like, does it really matter if the friggin' river is working or not? But then as you get deeper into it, you find that actually it does because
Yeah.
it starts to fall apart.
Yes, exactly. And the uh, the world the story takes place in
Hmm.
needs to be very detailed, very fleshed out, and believable because the world is the most important character in a fantasy story because it's the one everyone interacts with, even the villains.
Hmm.
I mean, take all the lore and stuff out of Middle Earth and what you have. The Lord of the Rings would never be as good.
It would just be
Yeah,
some loser little guy sits around and cries about a ring for 3 books. Yeah, it would be incredibly boring.
yeah, and this is something they screwed up with the Game of Thrones TV show because
Mm.
all of a sudden distance and travel time was not an issue anymore,
Yes.
even though it was set up earlier. Then they contradicted it. So big part of why the later seasons of that show didn't work.
That's a good example. And that's always usually another thing I like to ask, not just about someone's writing, but good examples of bad writing. And that, not to say that in a cruel sort of a way, but you can often learn by looking at things that suck.
Yes, because it's easier to see what doesn't work than what works, right?
Hmm.
I mean, look, you have to if you look at a car, right,
Hmm.
and one of the tires falls off and it's not driving properly, you can tell, yeah, it's missing a tire. That's the problem.
Hmm.
But if it's working, like working perfectly,
Hmm.
then there's nothing to put your finger on, is it? Everything just works.
Hmm. Yeah. And then what hubris though is there when somebody though does look and go, oh, when you take the wheel off the stupid car and you say, I'm going to take the wheel off the car but still expect it to work.
Exactly. And nobody will notice, right?
Mm,
Yes, they will,
yes, they will.
because it's in your face. You can't not notice it.
Yeah, and Game of Thrones is a really a great example. Right now, Stig and I are with a Sporking on his a book club that he has on his channel, and reading the book compared with what we know comes on later in the TV series, it's night and day. It's like looking at the difference between muddy water and a fine champagne. It's incomparable. And sometimes you can't always put your finger on it, but you know it when you see it, you know it when you taste it. You know what is crap and you know what is gold.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you talk about writing what you know, and you created this world within the world with Dungeons and Dragons, that is then what you know is you've lived and breathed it. How long have you been immersed in role playing Dungeons and Dragons and all that?
Oh, Dungeons and Dragons. That stuff just fell into my lap though, because I'm a fantasy buff and I read a lot.
Hmm.
And I used to play D&D, and someone needed help with creating a Viking-centric D&D world. Uh, that company was going to focus on that, and all of a sudden, I was just asked to be on because I'm from Norway, so I do know Viking mythology and stuff like that because we learn it in school from a young age. It's
Yeah,
all around us, really.
yeah, and that's also an interesting point that something like Viking culture.
Yeah,
It would
look,
go ahead.
like I said, write what you know.
Yeah, and just to put another spin on it, like if someone were to come to me first of all and ask me to write something like Dungeons and Dragons, which is not the kind of writing that I do, and then at the same time told me, okay, do something on the Vikings. Now I can always look something up on Wikipedia. I can always look at some TV show, but I will never have it in my soul the same way somebody who is born and raised within it.
Yeah, I I wouldn't be well. Some things you can't study though,
Mm-hmm.
but by all means. Um, but the less complicated it is, the easier it is to get into it and write it in a believable fashion.
Sure. And I think that goes also too about when you study on writing is simple. Sometimes people, I think, get a little too pretentious, perhaps. Start with something incredibly simple. It doesn't have to be this big, huge, complicated thing. I think of Tolkien. He started off the whole thing with in the oh gosh, a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit.
Yeah, and to be fair, the Lord of the Rings story isn't that complicated.
Mm-hmm.
It's fairly straightforward, but
Mm-hmm.
it's like I said, the world around the story and the world the stories takes place in
Mm-hmm. Yep.
is complex, but Tolkien manages to make it feel real. And the story and the universe, sorry, the world and the universe the story takes place in serves as the foundation for the story and also the framework.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone has cracks in it, the story will spill out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which we saw in Game of Thrones, the TV show,
Yes. Mm-hmm. Because
and also in the new Star Wars.
yeah, they broke the lore with one hyperspace scene.
Oh yeah, with quite a lot of things. And if you don't understand the source material of the thing you're writing, how the heck can the readers or the viewers understand what you're trying to say?
Yeah. And I also think it's kind of fascinating that Luke Skywalker being an example, and there's some other examples of fiction that we've seen where people don't accept, like the general public will not accept the ending of something when it's badly written. And sometimes I think they try to gaslight and say, oh, you just don't understand. It's like, no, we do understand. And they'll say, oh, you just don't like conflict, or you just don't like things when they don't have a happy ending. It's like, no, that's not the case. Many people will accept very unhappy endings. But what I think
Yeah,
an audience will not accept is if it's badly done.
yeah. People will accept a bad ending,
Hmm.
but they won't accept an ending that doesn't make sense
Yeah.
because readers and viewers have invested time and money into understanding what came before, right?
Hmm.
They will read up on lore or whatever it is if they're hooked on it, right? They want to
Hmm.
learn everything. So all of a sudden the ending happens, and everything you've invested time in understanding before that just gets tossed out the window. It's basically, yeah, sorry you put effort into this, but you know,
Hmm.
we didn't care that much,
Yeah.
or we didn't care as much as you did.
Yes. Or even worse, which I think happened with Benioff and Weiss on the TV show of the Game of Thrones, they got it into their head, we're going to surprise you, we're going to shock you, we're going to subvert your expectations. We know what's logical, but we're going to decide nope, because that would be predictable. And then threw in something that really wasn't logical or didn't make sense from what we'd seen before. That great
Yeah,
problem.
characters um, in a story must behave in a believable fashion.
Hmm.
That's pretty much a golden rule, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And I see a lot of the shows and movies that get a lot of criticism. That there is one of the problems because all of a sudden a character will do a 180
Yep.
in a non-believable fashion.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a good example of with Daenerys, I remember even saying at the time, if this is where J.R. Martin is going to take Daenerys, I can accept that. I can accept that.
Yeah,
And it was just that they didn't bring us there. And I'm very confident if that is George R. R. Martin's goal for Daenerys, he will bring us there in a masterful fashion.
yeah, and in a believable way.
Hmm.
So it's not like it happens overnight
Hmm.
with no foreshadowing or hints at it or anything. Just bam, she's crazy. It's not
Hmm.
how it works. Even the Mad King in that story took years and years before he became fully mad.
Hmm. Yeah, that's another good example. And if you one could say that the ending of the Lord of the Rings, that wasn't necessarily happily ever after at all. When you really think about it, Frodo failed. It was,
Yeah, oh yeah.
yeah.
But much like Star Wars, someone else had done something that made it not fail.
Hmm.
Because what Bilbo did when he spared Gollum led to basically Gollum saving the world.
Yep.
Chain of events, and it was believable,
Hmm.
completely believable for Gollum to behave like that.
Hmm. Yeah, and then Frodo doesn't get to go home and have peace. He's not happy. He's very unhappy. So much that basically he has to go to the Lord of the Rings equivalent of the Great Beyond. He can't be in the world anymore.
Yep.
Hmm.
In, in a sense, he dies. I guess.
Correct. He. Oh, okay. My brain just exploded. Yes, he does die. He actually does have a death,
Yeah, basically travels to paradise.
and he travels to paradise. You know what's very interesting? Oh my gosh, the fact that you just said that has to do with the symbolism of the ring. And it happening on March 25th, incarnation and all that kind of stuff that Tolkien did. See, the Christ-like figure a little bit that they have of Frodo. That makes complete sense. I don't know why I didn't think about it because I've studied a lot of that with the Lord of the Rings, but I never thought about it from that aspect. What's wrong with me?
I don't know. Oh, maybe you can ask me the difference between a monster and an antagonist.
Well, Okay, Steve, what is the difference? Go for it. What? Tell us what you have about that.
Well, that is a silly question. I refuse to answer that. Move
Oh,
along.
you sob. Wow. Okay. So, are you going to answer that, or are you just
No, no,
pulling
it's
my
just
chain?
bullshitting.
So, what's the difference between a monster and an antagonist? Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, it was just some bullshit I came up with,
Oh, okay.
so I could yank your chain.
Oh gosh, damn you. Okay, fine, fine. He yanked my chain. My chain is successfully yanked. Um, but yeah, that's a good example of a story again where it's unhappy, or something like Wuthering Heights, where they both literally just kind of kill each other through love and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, they're not happily ever after. Actually, very rarely happens in stories when you think about it, because not even fairy tales
It
are happily ever after.
Yeah, usually when someone writes a fantasy story or something,
Hmm.
they never expect that it's going to be a huge success, right?
Hmm.
So the first book is usually it usually can work as a standalone story,
Hmm.
and you see this in Star Wars Episode 4
Hmm.
because we don't know if the Empire is completely defeated, right? After
No.
Death Star blows up, we don't know if Vader survived or not,
Hmm.
and all the heroes get their medals and all that. And a lot of other fantasy stories have the same thing. The first Wheel of Time book can be read as a standalone book,
Hmm.
as can Raymond Feist's first book. So what they tend to do is have some threads unresolved that they then build on later.
Hmm.
Because I think if you start a book series, right,
Hmm.
uh, the first as as your first novel, and you expect, hey, this is so great, they're gonna buy all 10 of my books. You're in for a nasty surprise.
Oh, you just blew my mind a little bit. You're actually right, because yeah, people will read it and they have no reason to care, do they?
Exactly, and if the first book doesn't hook anyone,
Uh-huh.
then the next ones aren't gonna be sold.
Uh-huh.
You know?
You're exactly right. And when Star Wars did that, as you said, the Wheel of Time, and it just even occurred to me, even Harry Potter. If she had have written the first book, say with an ending like the fifth book, The Order of the Phoenix, yeah,
Yeah,
people would have been, this is crap.
yeah. Because if you read the first Harry Potter book, right,
Mhm.
Voldemort is defeated.
He is.
Yeah, so it functions perfectly as its own thing. But then it became a huge success, and it just grew and grew.
Yeah.
But yeah, book one is usually something that can stand on its own.
You're right. And she left enough threads that then when it was a great success and was picked up on, then she was able to continue with that.
Yeah. So that's a writing tip for whoever listens that wants to write a book. Just stick to one book first.
Yeah. Write a work as though it's not going to be successful.
Yeah.
The paradox there. Yeah. And we sometimes see it a little bit in some of the comic writing community, and even in the movie communities and the like, where people, I think, perhaps don't always understand that you don't get proclaimed a great writer, you have to earn it.
Yes. If you're a great writer or not is pretty much up to the readers.
Hmm.
And I guess I'd also be if you want to self-publish, uh, think it through
Mm-hmm.
quite a bit before, because it is a shortcut, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your book will get put out there, but you don't have the backing of a publisher that has funds for marketing,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't have access to a very good editor usually.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen a lot of writers say this: a novel is not the work of one person.
No.
One person came up with it, wrote it, and then you have the editor and everyone else fixing it and selling it. So
Yes.
it's a group effort.
Yeah, good point. And you talked about you not only have access to all of those things, but you also have access to an editor. And an editor, that's not something that is just something that someone comes up with too. Becoming an editor and a good editor, that in itself is its own craft.
Yeah, I mean, how many books do you think have been saved by a good editor?
Mm. I can only imagine. I mean, I know that in some of my work, the editor that I worked with, he once cut. It was an essay. I wrote academic stuff. He once cut out like 10 pages that took goodness knows how much of research for me to do. And he was right though. He was absolutely right. It just did not flow, it did not go, and it just did not go along with my thesis very well. And it was just like, no, that's just gotta go. Boom. It was gone.
Yeah,
Yeah. And guess how
yeah.
much I cried and told him, "Oh, I know better. How could you do this to me?"
Oh, probably a lot. You're female after all.
Ah, oh, you know that that's not true. It was actually, oh, he's right. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it's very easy to fall into a trap if you have your close friends read your work,
Yes.
and more often than not, they'll just tell you, "Oh, it's fantastic, you're great,"
Hmm.
right? Just by default.
Yeah.
So, but that's not good feedback, is it?
No. It Interestingly enough, your work should probably be edited by someone you don't like.
Yeah,
Don't be friends with your editor. Or if you're an editor, don't, how do I describe this? But this doesn't happen in the publishing world, where they get starstruck by their by their writers. Maybe it happens with a few, but I would bet you even the big superstars they listen to their editors.
yeah, and uh, a lot of writers I've noticed that are fresh tend to, and I even see this on Twitter. People say, "Oh, I came up with this great character, so awesome. It's gonna put him or her in my book,"
Mhm.
right? But even though that character is the coolest character ever written, if that character is only in the book to be cool, it's a bad character, because the character needs to have a reason to be in the story, because that character will get the spotlight now and again, right?
Mhm.
But if that character doesn't contribute to the advancement of the plot, that character will just be stealing spotlight away from the characters that do have something to do with the plot and the advancement of the story.
Uh, Gosh, here I'm saying absolutely, absolutely, but it's definitely agreed. And that's not to say that if you do come up with a character and it could be the best character ever, it's just not for that story. Set it,
Exactly.
yeah, set it
So
aside. The person may fit perfectly within something else.
yeah, because it derails the stories a little bit if you have you know, the elven sword master that's in there being cool.
Hmm.
You know, if that character has no real investment in the plot, and all that character does is kill orcs, then it's not going to be an interesting character, and it's not going to be a character that carries with him a lot of investment.
Hmm. And I think that's why we naturally bristle, even subconsciously, at whenever we see we're going to have a show with a strong female with a badass swordsman who's gay, or just everything is just like with these all these adjectives thrown at it. And it's like, I don't care if it's a woman, I don't care if the person's gay, I don't care if they're badass at swords. What are they
Yeah,
doing?
if if a character is only in there to represent a skin color or whatever,
Hmm.
that character will by default only be skin deep.
Hmm.
But Alformo in the chat says, "How about a cool character that acts as a supporting character or a mentor?
Mm,
If he does that, then he's contributing."
precisely. Yeah, I think what Stig isn't saying, that he's he's saying exactly that. If he has a purpose and if he's a mentor, then he is providing it. Just
Yeah,
if they're just in there just to be window dressing. I think a great
yeah,
example of that is your namesake Obi-Wan Kenobi in the
yeah,
original A New Hope. That's exactly what he was.
yeah. And if you look at the sequel trilogy, pretty much, I think you can remove all scenes with Rose, Tico, and Finn, and the
Hmm.
story will end the same way.
Hmm.
They're in it, they have potential, but it goes nowhere. And John Boyega agrees with me on this, fiercely so.
Yes. Well, I think the whole world does. I would even go so far as to
Even
argue. Sorry,
even Poe. What's the point of Poe? He
not at
doesn't do
all.
anything to help the plot.
Nope. And I would take it even so far as to say, Ray. What's the point of Ray?
Yeah,
A girl kind of sits around and cries a lot and says, "I'm nobody," and then at the end she says, I'm someone. I'm a Skywalker," and
yeah,
we're all, so what?
yep. Um, Rushed writing.
Yeah,
It's almost like it was created in a lab. The
and
the target audience will like one of these, one of that. Then they just glued it together.
hmm, yeah. Deliberate Zero says that's a great point. They're adding great with a sword in the same way they add is a woman to the character. Strong females just inherently the best at swords. No need for training. He has it.
Yeah. If you have training or you point out that they have had training in their background,
Hmm.
fine. You know,
Yeah.
no problem. But just picking up a sword and just, yeah, I know how to use this perfectly. It's not interesting at all. There's no growth. And this is writing thing though, because there's 3 points, I guess, in to a story. It's movement. Movement leads to growth. Growth leads to change.
Hmm.
If you don't have this, nothing happens in the story. Movement can be a physical one, like in the Lord of the Rings, or it can be a character developing, right?
Hmm.
And that leads to growth. The story grows, it expands, or the character grows and expands, right?
Hmm.
It's fleshed out, and that leads to change because that changes the story. Like
Hmm.
Luke has now learned to use the Force. This changes a lot of things, right?
Yep.
If you don't do this, the story stands still.
Yeah. And that's the whole things that we all learned in English class,
Yeah,
literature class. Yeah, the different parts of the story, and it has to climax. It has to have a denouement.
yeah. And the protagonist must be challenged by a problem or conflict that requires a resolution.
Hmm.
You can't have him just battling elven ghosts for eternity. 'Cause then it doesn't go anywhere,
Yeah,
right?
there has to have a clear point and inherent in all that. And this is, I think, the most elusive part when you're talking about fiction writing. You have to have a character that people give a darn about.
Yeah, which goes back to characters need to behave in a believable fashion.
Hmm.
I also feel that names are important
Mm,
because names should be catchy, right? So if you read them or heard them once, you remember them. And I see a lot of fantasy books where they have all kinds of long names that are son of someone with a long name and stuff like that.
Hmm.
It's too much. I mean, look at the Star Wars, right? You have
Hmm.
Luke, Han, Ben, and Leia. Short names,
Hmm.
easy to remember, and they're also different, so you don't have too many characters with similar names.
Good point. And they're not pretentious names either.
No, they're not.
Yeah, not only are they short, they're good, and they're also familiar with what we know. George Lucas was writing Star Wars in it for something universal, but it was also something that was towards an American audience. Let's be honest, that was the target audience for the movie, and they were names that were very simple and familiar to an American audience.
Yeah, and sometimes it's good if names kind of in a way tells you something about the character, right?
Hmm.
I mean, if you hear the name Luke Skywalker, it says something.
Hmm.
It's a simple name, but he's going to walk the sky, right? He's
Yep.
going to travel into space. You have Han Solo, the word solo, he's out for number one. That's how he
Hmm.
starts out.
Leia Organa. Well, it says a lot about she's very fancy. She's royalty.
Yeah, that's a very, almost like a dashing name in a sense.
Hmm.
Little things like that enhances the story, in my opinion, because it simplifies it in a way that makes it easier to get into.
Uh-huh.
And not every story needs to be a complicated one. I mean, the best ones are probably the straightforward ones.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking of course, the hero's journey, but also even some of uh, my favorites that are fiction. It's chick flicks, okay? They're chick flicks, okay? But things like Jane Eyre or the ones of Jane Austen. It usually starts off with a chick hanging around in a bonnet, and some rich dude kind of shows up. They all have a little bit of drama and misunderstandings, and then at the end, they all get married.
Yeah,
Uh, but they're some of the greatest books in English literature that exist.
yeah, and like I said, the Lord of the Rings isn't a complicated story.
Hmm.
It's good versus evil,
Hmm.
and it's an underdog story.
Yeah. Lion Witch in the Wardrobe, same thing.
Yeah,
Some kids go into a wardrobe and they're in this magical land. There's an evil witch. Yeah, there's a lion. There's some allegory there, but
yeah. And usually, the hero in fantasy stories is a normal dude, right,
hmm.
or a girl.
Hmm.
Usually an orphan actually, or a farmer, stuff like that. Blacksmiths happens a lot, and so they start off fairly low on the ranking list of medieval society,
Hmm.
and the villain is usually a someone powerful, which is actually a, a writing rule that I tend to agree with. It's the strength of the protagonist is measured by the threat of the antagonist. So the more powerful the antagonist, the stronger the protagonist has to become.
And then a believable story has the protagonist climbing up to that point.
Exactly, and with the aid of friends usually,
Hmm.
or like they pointed out in the chat, a mentor,
Hmm.
someone who has been very powerful, maybe,
Yeah.
or
And then
knows how to defeat the powerful antagonist, something like that.
like Gandalf to Frodo, Obi-Wan to Luke,
Yep,
um,
Merlin to King Arthur,
Merlin to King Arthur. Um, well, heck, even in Game of
oh,
Thrones, there were very many mentor characters.
or what about Mick to Rocky,
Amen, amen, amen. Yes, that's
or
a.
Indiana Jones's dad?
Oh
He's the one
yes.
who taught him all the languages.
That is correct. Yeah, that no one is an island.
Exactly.
Okay, Alformo has a good question here. What do you guys think of characters evil for evil's sake? I don't think antagonist or villain doesn't have to be a reason to be evil sometimes.
Well, the evil is the acts they do
Hmm.
that manifest themselves as evil from a moral point of view.
Hmm.
But usually, evil characters don't do stuff for the sake of evil. They think they're right. They uh, an antagonist always needs to have a reason for doing what he or she does. They need to have a goal as well, same as the protagonist.
Yeah, yeah.
It,
Perhaps.
it, it-
I'm
it's
sorry.
just that those goals conflict with each other.
Yeah, and it can be a goal as simple as something like Palpatine, which is I want to take over the galaxy and have an empire. It doesn't have to be huge and complicated. Um,
No, but
in the case
he
of it,
wants to control the galaxy because he genuinely believes he's the best man for the job. He is psychotic, of course, but from his point of view, he has the right of it.
yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying there. I was just, I guess maybe I was also going with just that it's not. It doesn't have to be this big, huge, elaborate, complicated thing.
Yeah,
That sometimes it's just as simple as that, or sometimes it's just as simple as a person's BS crazy.
yeah,
Um,
and if you think about it in a story set in modern times, right?
mhm.
In the real world, the antagonist or the big evil could be one of the best lawyers in the country that is defending someone who's done something wrong, and the protagonist is the lawyer facing him in the courtroom.
Hmm. Yeah. To also go with a modern fictional character that's pure evil and motivation, something like Hannibal Lecter. What do you think of someone like him?
He is pure evil. He's a psychopath, which I do believe is the closest you get to manifestation of evil,
Of just
because
pure evil
yeah,
because
because
it's just evil.
there's no conscience there. There's no morality, no sense of right and wrong.
Yeah. And if you were even to ask Hannibal Lecter, the same way you would ask someone in real life that's a serial killer, why do you do it? They probably wouldn't have an answer.
Yeah, they just do it. They're lacking they're lacking the ingredients that make good people good.
Hmm. Yeah.
So it's not really evil, but it's more like the absence of anything good, I
Hmm.
guess.
Like a vacuum. Yeah, yeah. It's like a personal human vacuum. And Rusa, I see here, does a psychopath get made or are they born? Now that is that's going more into some metaphysical territory. Maybe
Yeah,
for another discussion. Maybe on my Catholic explaining because I do go into some of that a little bit about why is there evil? Those kind of questions are a little more along the, as I said, metaphysical line. But when you're dealing with writing or within a story, correct me if I'm wrong, Stig, if you see it that it's just they are evil and this is their motivation and this is their point in the story.
yeah. Um, Usually, people that are evil in a story are evil because they do things that good people would not do.
Hmm. And along these lines, because we're talking now about story and evil, that what do you think about magic in stories?
Well, magic in fantasy, uh, there's two ways to go about it. I feel one of them is you need a magic system because magic works a certain way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, that's the science of the fantasy story. But if you overdo it and explain it too much and make it too much, well, too common, I suppose,
Mm-hmm.
then it's not magic because it's common. I mean, when it comes to magic, in my opinion, less is more.
Hmm.
And if you look at Lord of the Rings, there's actually not that much magic being used. But when Gandalf does use magic, it's wow, right?
Mm-hmm.
The wizard used magic. If he had been tossing fireballs or something all through the story, and he explains to Frodo that yes, this fireball is a level 3 spell in my spell book. It just loses the magic, doesn't it?
Yeah. The magic loses its magic the more you magic.
Yeah, exactly. So I always thought it's more magical if the magic is put on the fringe of the story,
Mm-hmm.
so magic can't solve every problem. I think magic was taken too far in the Harry Potter stories because if you start thinking about how it works, right,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes obvious that they could have used magic, well, certain spells several times to solve a problem. I mean, that spell that cracks the glass in the glasses, you know?
Mm-hmm.
What if you use that spell on someone's eye? Just crack their eyes. They could do that with Voldemort.
Oh.
Or if Voldemort can affect someone's mind to make them do his bidding, how come he doesn't do that to some pimp and have him show up at Harry Potter's home and shoot him?
Problem solved.
Exactly. So you need to be very careful with that because it has ripple effects, right?
Yeah.
'Cause if you know this is possible, then they should be able to do this later on
Mm-hmm.
because there's no reason not to.
Yes. And that's where, yeah, if you think too hard about something like Harry Potter, yeah, that it does kind of fall apart a bit. I think that Harry Potter though can work so because she is very well at crafting a story, and when you think about the audience and what she's achieving, she wasn't going for great literature. She was,
No, no, and
you know,
by all means, I'm not bashing
no, no,
uh,
no.
Harry Potter, but and a lot of people love those stories, and I happen to think they're great as well. But if you start digging into the magic of that story, it's easy to find
She's
some cracks, maybe, maybe. And
no, absolutely, and I think that that's what makes magic so dangerous. Yeah, I've not really delved into fiction besides a little bit of fan fiction, which doesn't exactly count. It just nonfiction history, academia. That's my thing. But if I were to go with fiction, I can just tell you right now, no way in HELL would I even touch magic with a 10-foot pole. It would suck so bad. It just wouldn't even. If I
yeah,
just
and
associate.
yeah, and if you think if you look at Skyrim, I know you've been playing that, right?
Yes.
And in the Elder Scrolls world, everyone can learn magic.
Hmm.
You even start off with some spells.
Hmm.
So how the heck would a prison in that world even work?
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. It works in a video game, and there's some good discussion in our chats here
Yeah,
about these kind of things. Um, uh, so yeah, this is great, and it wouldn't make a good story, but it makes a good video game. And of course, video games is a form of fiction writing, but obviously with many different kinds of rules, and it's a place where I believe it is appropriate to be have your a Mary Sue or a Larry Stu, because as the main character, like I am when I'm playing Skyrim, yeah, I'm a total Mary Sue.
Yeah, and yeah, good point by Time Prophet. Because if magic has a price, especially a steep one,
Hmm.
um, then yes, it you can solve a lot of problems with that, rather.
Hmm.
But well, in Game of Thrones, it certainly seems to have a price.
Mm. Yes, and I know that we on the with the interesting on Sporking's podcast, there's a lot of talk about spoiler speculation about the cost of magic.
Yeah, um, yeah, it's a very it can become a slippery slope very fast. So
Hmm.
when you're writing a fantasy story and all that, you need to really weigh the pros and cons when it comes to
Hmm.
magic. And the more magic you have, the more you need to make like a system of rules for it.
Hmm.
The less you have, the more magical it will seem, but you also need to use it sparingly, and you can't just have the whole resolution to the story be solved by someone casting a spell nobody's ever heard of.
Yeah. Now, to circle back around a little bit to what we were talking about the process of writing and how you write and how it needs to be organized. When you write, do you actually create an outline? I'm
Yeah,
curious. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Because if you create an outline, um, what I do, I make a beginning and then an ending, right?
Hmm.
And then I work the ending towards the beginning in a sense. And I always keep asking who, how, and why. Because if you can explain those three questions, right,
Hmm.
all the time, then the readers will understand it. Because let's say, some goblins attack I don't know, a caravan of with some people in it. That's how it starts.
Hmm.
So why are they doing that? Who are they doing it to? Who made them do it? And how did they do it? Right?
Hmm.
If you can answer all those questions, you'll have the start of a story.
Yeah.
And if you keep asking those questions all through the writing process, and you can answer them, and the book or other everything you write can answer it too,
Hmm.
then the readers will understand the story. And usually, um, when a story can't answer one of these, that's when you have problems. And with the Star Wars sequel trilogy, it's the how.
Mm. Well, I would say the how, and if you would, I would also add the why on that. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
why are we even doing this?
yeah. But how can Luke Skywalker die from a Force overdose when it's not possible to do that? And
Yeah.
how did he get his X-wing to the planet he's on without an R2 unit? Because he need those to plot hyperspace jumps in an X-wing. You know,
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff like that. Um, and how can Force ghosts all of a sudden hold a lightsaber?
Hmm. And bring lightning down.
Yeah, and then you have the second problem. Why didn't they do that? Because you can have Ghost Luke Skywalker and Yoda attack Palpatine at the end with lightsabers and lightning,
Yeah.
and Palpatine won't be able to do a damn thing about it.
Yeah. You don't even need Ray or emo Ben
Yeah,
Solo.
yeah, yeah. This is they actually created a Deus Ex Machina with that, which is really bad writing.
Yes.
I mean, if this was possible, Ghost Yoda and Ghost Kenobi could have had lightning strike both Vader and Palpatine at any time during the old trilogy.
Yeah. Absolutely, and it rendered all of that useless. That's a good point. And speaking of Deus Ex Machina, for the friends at home, what is a Deus Ex Machina, and why is it a problem?
A Deus Ex Machina is basically a cop out. I mean, let's say the story is about some hero is to kill a dragon. That's the story, right? Dragon
Hmm.
has been terrorizing the land. There's no way to kill it, so he confronts the dragon, and he does no harm to it with his sword. But then he gets slammed into a wall. Some rubble collapses. He
Hmm.
finds a dagger that has the dragon's name on it, and he uses that to stab the dragon, and he dies. That dagger is a Deus Ex Machina. It's basically a divine intervention from a bad writer.
Yeah. Yeah. The Time Prophet here, he says it as, it is a big red button which solves everything.
Yeah,
And you never see it till like the last minute. They like never tell you
exactly.
it's there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's and another thing that's good with outlining is if you plot the story out in advance, right?
Hmm.
You know where it's going. You know how the characters are going to get from A to B, and where they're going to find this and that item or that bit of information. If you've done all that beforehand, you've done all the heavy lifting,
Hmm.
and you won't run into writer's block because you already resolved whatever would give you writer's block.
Yes.
But I wouldn't say that outlining everything to the last detail is a good thing because then you'll have to pretty much write the same book twice.
Mm. Yeah.
So outline with major plot points.
Yeah.
Then you can have fun getting them to this and that with each chapter, and you'll
Yeah.
still feel like you're writing basically.
Yeah. You have to leave room for creativity where
Yeah,
the paradox is that if you are very well planned, you will have the looseness to improvise.
yeah.
Lots of paradoxes in writing. All Farmhouse has a question, for, I believe for you, Stig. How many prominent characters in a book would you have? How many is too much, and how many is too little?
Have as many as you need basically. But sometimes it's not a bad thing to merge two characters into one
Mm,
because some characters can serve several purposes. And like I said, if you have a character that's basically just in it to be cool and contribute a little, it'll take the spotlight away from all the others that actually contribute a lot. And um, if you look at the early Star Wars books, sorry, the early Star Wars movies, there's not that many characters in it.
no.
All of them serve a distinct purpose.
Mm, yeah, and the simple answer, of course, is uh, how many are needed for your story, because you can have a huge ensemble cast, or you
Yeah,
could do a story with just one person, literally one person, be the whole book.
yeah. But usually, if you have two, well, this is why they have two polar opposites a lot in
Hmm.
TV shows
Hmm.
because you can't do internal dialogue
Mm.
on screen. So that's why you have Mulder and Scully
Hmm.
because they will discuss the same thing a person would have an internal dialogue about. So Scully believes in science and all that. Mulder believes in supernatural stuff, right?
Hmm.
Yet Mulder is an atheist and Scully is a Christian.
Hmm.
So you have two very polar opposites, and every time they interact, they're telling the audience answers to what the audience are asking themselves, right?
Hmm.
So it's a trick a lot of TV shows do, and it works. Uh, you kind of see it in a little bit in Lethal Weapon too, because Murtaugh and Riggs are polar opposites.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of the yeah the whole concept of the odd couple.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but they're usually like that for a reason. Well, for two reasons. It's very entertaining,
Hmm.
but also it solves that. I guess it makes info dumping come out in a natural way
Hmm.
through dialogue.
And through humor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Deliberate Zero. I actually disagree with you, but I want to let Stig answer because I want to see what he says. He says even when Han turns up to help Luke at the end of the trench run, I'd say that's a bit of a Deus ex machina.
No, no, because the Millennium Falcon and Han Solo have been introduced earlier, and their friendship have evolved as well.
Mhm.
If Han Solo shows up at the end, if he's only been there for 2 minutes earlier, or rather 2 minutes in the entire movie at the beginning, and then he shows up and saves the day, that's a Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah,
Especially if there was no reason for him to be in that area either.
yeah. I would. I can see your point though, Deliberate Zero, because it seems like yeah, everything maybe wouldn't have worked out if Han had not come at that moment. But I don't, it's not necessarily it's not a Deus Ex Machina. I believe actually there is. Is there a name for that, Steve, where someone does does that? Because we've seen that and we saw it in Lord of the Rings as well, and it's not a bad storytelling device.
The Eagles in the Lord of the Rings are a bit of a Deus Ex Machina because that bit is not foreshadowed at all.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, yeah, and Deliberate Zero, yes, he says agreed that they shut up and they established and it set up for him from the start, helping their villain. Yeah, and I think I understand what you're saying, Deliberate Zero, that you weren't saying that as an absolute statement, but as a sort of statement.
It's part of Han Solo's growth as a character.
Yeah, but help me out here, Steve. What is it called? What Han Solo did? Because there were times when that happened. You said the Eagles were a bit of a Deus Ex Machina, but it wasn't necessarily a. I don't believe it was a Deus Ex Machina like at the end of Helm's Deep when all of a sudden, Gandalf and all them arrive for the whole.
No, yeah, yeah, because that was set up. Gandalf said they would arrive
Mhm.
at that
Yeah.
point.
So it's mainly building tension when they do that because it does happen a lot where all is lost, we're all screwed, we're all gonna die, and then
Uh, I just call it convenient timing. No,
sometimes
but
simple. The answer is a simple answer. Oh my
yeah,
gosh, Alformo, you got me. A half machina.
yeah. No, that's just a heroic moment. I'd say it's something to give the audience a reason to cheer, and But in the case of Han Solo, it certainly is set up.
Yeah.
As for the Lord of the Rings with the Eagles don't solve the problem though. They save Frodo and Sam, so I think in that case it's more like a symbolism thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, it's very convenient, but if they had showed up and grabbed the ring and tossed it into the pit, then it certainly would have been a Deus Ex Machina.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking, would that be that's part of it's the eucatastrophe that I knew that there was a certain role because that's what J.R.R. Tolkien actually did call it, the eucatastrophe, a sudden turn of events at the end of a story which ensures that the protagonist does not meet some terrible impending and very plausible and probable doom.
Yeah, it's basically a sudden turn from really bad to
Hmm.
better.
Yes, yes. I knew it was nibbling at the back of my mind what that was. And speaking of essays, you see, I'm an essayist. That's mainly what I've written, and I wrote a daggone essay on it. I should know better, but that's what happens when you do something on a Friday night after a lot of work. It's like, yes, yes. What a guy, Tolkien. He's one of my favorite writers. Amazing, amazing writer.
I always saw him as a better creator than a writer
mm,
because, like I said earlier, Middle Earth is an insanely big creation. There's even languages to go with it.
yeah. Well, and I think that I know I fudged up the beginning a little bit because when I said that you being nonfiction and in the same sense of this, because in many ways it's fiction, but it's like they write it like it's nonfiction because they write it like it's history. Like when you create a world, if you're going to create it well, you're writing it as though it's completely real, even if it is
Yeah,
technically made up.
yeah. If you as a writer can't believe that what you're writing is real,
Hmm.
then the readers won't either.
Yes, you have to completely convince them to live within the world.
Yeah, basically, uh, if you don't believe in the magic of your words, you're not going to write anything magical.
Mm. Ooh, let's put that on a poster. Part of me is like, that's good. That's a good one. Um, Alformo says, so thoughts on the writing of New Milan. I can't answer that because I haven't seen it and I have no intention.
It's a political drivel edited in a lab. It
Yeah.
has no heart. It has no soul.
Mhm. No. And I'd like to also make a little bit of pause because we've talked, both of us have been published, but there's also nothing quote unquote wrong with writing for the sake of writing, even with the idea that it's never going to get published. For example,
Oh
Sandy,
no!
who I had on here, yeah,
Oh
she has
yeah!
no intention of ever getting published with her writing, but she has written extensively
Yeah.
about writing for writing's sake. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Um, no, it's an excellent hobby. I supported 5,000%. You know,
Hmm.
if you like doing that, there's no harm.
Hmm.
Keep at it and have as much fun as you can because um, the best and the cheapest toys in the world are words. You can do whatever you want with them. There's no budget on it, and at the end of the day, you can play with it by only having a plot of sand and a stick.
Do
And you don't even have to write it. You can have it take place in your head. Imagination.
no. Wow. Oh, I just got chills. Now I know how much you love Barbies, Stig, but that's exactly right. It doesn't even have to be words. I used to have the
Uh,
most elaborate plots with my Barbies when I was younger, when I was a kid.
I don't like Barbies.
I know you don't like Barbies, but action figures. I'm sure. I mean, did you play? I also played with Star Wars action figures. I had the most elaborate crossover plots and all sorts of stuff with my action figures.
Yeah, that's writing. It's the same thing.
Hmm.
Your writing is storytelling,
Hmm.
and um, yeah,
Hmm. Yeah.
if
Oh.
if you're having fun and it doesn't harm anyone, do it as much as you want. I mean, it's all good. It's writing and reading is an excellent stress uh, reliever as well. It's relaxing, and when you're doing it, you're focusing on it, which means you're not focusing on everything that's bad in the world.
Hmm. In which,
So
sorry.
it's therapeutic.
Yeah, which is why, in my humble opinion, what they did with things like Star Wars and how they're trying to crapple over our most precious stories, our most precious lore, is so borderline cruel. Be-
Apparently, I said something profound. I'm
oh,
not sure what that is.
yeah, I was gonna say it was.
I'm just babbling, Rosa.
Yeah.
It's if something clever comes out, it's entirely by accident.
Yeah, well, and that's what the joy I have of these kind of conversations, because you never know what's gonna pop out. And at the time, Prophet said he said two published poems published, but that's all I write because I enjoy writing. Absolutely, and that's also a little bit of the paradox that if you if you write without thinking of the publisher, you actually might have a better chance of being published, if that makes any sense. Because for one thing, you are building your craft. Every time you write down anything, you build your craft.
Yeah,
And
it's what you should do. I think if you're if you want to learn how to write and stuff like that, you have to read, write,
mhm,
repeat. If you keep doing that, you're developing skills because it's hard to write something or write a novel if you've never read one, right?
mhm,
So
mhm,
the more books you read, the more you'll pick up on how a book is written,
mhm,
and it helps you.
yeah. Yeah, and the thing that's also fascinating is that it's not just reading, but it's also being read too. For example, they do studies and the like where children that are read to, like even when they're babies, you can read to a baby, and it in a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, that you'll find that their literacy skills, their verbal skills are through the friggin' roof. And then and they tend to learn how to read faster. And then, of course, they go mad and read like crazy when they finally can.
Yeah, I can't remember a time where I didn't read,
Hmm.
and I started reading cartoons. Oh, sorry, comics. When I was a
Hmm.
kid, I'd read, Donald Duck and all kinds of stuff that very young kids read, right?
Hmm.
Then I moved on to superhero stuff, and then I started reading. Well, the first book I ever read was Treasure Island by Robert
Mm.
Louis Stevenson, which is probably the best pirate story ever written,
Yes.
and certainly a very good book for a kid living on an island surrounded by ocean and boats and stuff to read. Um, then I read a hell of a lot of Hardy Boys books. Then
Yeah.
moved on to westerns, and then I think I started reading the Conan comics,
Yeah.
which are gritty as hell. And I know I only started reading them because it said comics for adults on it. So that meant if I read it, I was an adult,
Yeah.
which is stupid as shit. But I did that. And then
Uh-huh.
someone said, "Oh yeah, a friend of mine who also read them said, hey, you need to read the Lord of the Rings." I'm like, what's that? Ah, it has swords and shit in it. Okay, so I read that one and got hooked. And then moved on to Terry Brooks, Robert Jordan, Raymond Feist, all the good old boys. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's just escalated.
Yeah.
I I think I'm at 34 books read this year. A little bit of COVID has a bit to do with that, though, social
Yeah.
distancing. But yeah, it's you
Yeah.
know,
No, absolutely. And I have a similar story, almost a similar, but I read Mandy magazine for girls. It was something I read as a little girl in Ireland, and would come out every Wednesday. The new comics would come out, very girly stories. And for me, it wasn't Hardy Boys, but it was Nancy Drew. I read all the Nancy Drews, and then moved on to a lot of the very same ones that you just mentioned.
Nancy Drew actually has quite a few video games, point and click adventure mystery games with Nancy Drew.
Ooh.
Yeah, so she's done better over the years than the Hardy Boys.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Yep,
Uh-oh.
the girl won.
Yay. We see, speaking of which, Nancy Drew, she's been around since like what, 19 friggin' 30. It's like, oh, they weren't ever any things for girls. It's like, really? And for me,
You know what? If you like Nancy Drew, odds are you also like the Hardy Boys.
yes.
It's the same kind of stuff.
Yep.
It's you know what? All that female protagonist and male protagonist stuff. It's all bullshit because if you like the genre, you're gonna read the genre.
Yep.
Because I've never heard anyone who liked Miss Marple say that they don't like Poirot
Mm-hmm.
or vice versa.
Yep. Both. Oh gosh, you know me. I
Yeah,
love Poirot and I love Miss Marple.
and everyone who likes sci-fi stories also like the Alien movies because it doesn't matter if Ripley is female or male.
Mm-hmm.
What matters is that it's a good story with a good central character.
Yep.
That's it.
Terminator, same idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent point. And because mystery, that's a genre that I was also very much into. And then when I got old enough, I got into Agatha Christie with her ones with Poirot and Miss Marple. And that's the other thing is my favorite detective, though. Even though I love Miss Marple, I liked Poirot better. And I guess if we go by the way things are modern nowadays, where you're only supposed to like what you are, I guess I shouldn't have liked Poirot.
Yeah, and I'd say the same thing applies to gaming because I remember a while ago people go, oh, there aren't enough games for girls or women, right? I'm like, bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Every female gamer I know has played the hell out of Skyrim and games like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a guy or girl thing. It's just gaming. I
Yep.
mean, even the term female gamer is bullshit. The gamers.
Exactly. Why try to diminish yourself? The character I'm currently playing on Skyrim is Pepper the cat. It's like you can make of it what you will, but I never sit around and think it's Pepper the female cat who is
Yeah.
showing my empowerment and I'm relating to her. It's like no, it's a cat running around in Skyrim, and actually the real name is a Khajiit and
And
in Pepper.
to be fair, if someone's playing Skyrim, some woman is playing Skyrim and she's playing it, for female empowerment or whatever, that's not wrong either.
No.
It's all good because it's your game.
Yep.
But you're still playing Skyrim,
Yep.
so clearly that game is for both genders equally. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a gamer wants to explore a fantasy world and kick
Mm-hmm.
ass. That's it.
Yeah, precisely. And along these lines, Alformo is asking Sig Teresa, do you think there's a general difference between the writing style of female and male?
I'd say if the writer is a woman, naturally she would have more insight when it comes to writing from a female's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say because George Martin is being praised for being very good at that
Mm-hmm.
for writing females, and not every writer out there is always as good as that.
Yeah.
So it it probably is a thing,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. But as we
um,
just said, Agatha Christie wrote Miss Marple and Poirot, and both of them were genius. So,
yeah, and
yeah.
first and foremost, if a book is good, it's because of the writer's skill, not the
Mm.
gender.
Yeah. Yeah. I will, though, give a slight caveat that women do tend to write chick flicks better. I mean, they just do.
Could be, but
I can't think of a good chick flick, a book chick flick stuff written by a dude. I'm not saying that a person couldn't, because as you said, if they're a good writer, I'm just saying I think that sometimes there are natural differences between men and women will be drawn often to write a certain type, and men will be drawn to do a certain type. Just like the same way that Stig, I don't think you've ever read any of some of the chick flick books that I
No,
like to read.
I don't think I ever will.
Yes. So you've never read a Jane Austen book, am I correct?
Very correct.
Yeah.
But
And
I have seen Jane Austen movies.
mhm,
Uh, but yeah, I don't remember too much about them though. But
yeah. Yeah. And I'm speaking of course, very generally, because there's always crossover, as we've just said. Oh, Time Prophet points out that there are some good romance writers who are male, but they write under a female name, so you would know that's probably true.
yeah, but Jane Austen though has sold a tremendous amount of books, and she
Yeah.
is without a doubt one of the best writers that the world has had. So
Yeah.
much respect for that. But like
Yeah.
I said, you do read the genre you're interested in.
Yeah.
So whilst it's not my cup of tea, I'm happy that millions of others are enjoying their cup of tea.
Hmm. Exactly. And I think that just talks to inclinations, but there's always exceptions to that as well. Uh, Going really deep, Shakespeare, holy crap, he could write both male and female.
Yeah, and he also delved into fantasy,
Hmm.
so making him one of the first fantasy writers.
And yeah, Midsummer Night's Dream.
Yeah, and the Tempest, that one had witches and magic in it, didn't it?
Mm. Yeah, and well, Macbeth.
Yeah,
And
and Hamlet, it had a ghost. That's fantasy.
hmm yep. And while sometimes people get their underwear in a twist trying to say things like Lady Macbeth and all that, and Ophelia for female characters, like, oh, it's all that patriarchal, the weak female thing, they forget that Shakespeare also wrote characters like Beatrice and Much Ado About Nothing. So,
Oh, which is an awesome character.
yes.
A little bit like a mirror image of Benedict, though.
Yeah. But yeah, but when you consider the fact that we're talking the 16th century and it's a dude, it was an incredibly well crafted character. I love. I
Oh yeah,
love Much Ado About Nothing.
also a very good movie.
Oh yes, very well done, Kenneth Branagh. But like Much Ado and Nothing and Twelfth Night. That one is also again a very well crafted female character.
Yeah, I think if you have a good idea for a story, right,
Hmm.
and you like it so much, you should write it so that that story is not forgotten.
Yep, exactly.
Seems to be an okay advice. It's
Yep,
up to and it's up to you to do that as a writer.
yep. Oh, reply to Time Prophet. But in Shakespeare plays, all female parts were played by men. That was the times. Women did not do theater, but that had nothing to do with how he crafted the
I bet,
character. Um,
I bet you those times are gonna happen again. Sorry, got a bit political.
You're gonna get my YouTube channel canceled.
Hmm.
Oh, whatever follower 218. No, 28. I got it, or 27. I actually gained some subs. Alfarmo says, if we're going that far back, won't the ancient Greek stories would they be considered fantasy since it has gods in it? Sure, why
No, because they consider that to be truth.
not? Ah, okay.
They absolutely believe that stuff.
Yeah.
It's fantasy now because we know better, but back then they believed that.
Ah,
They thought there was a Mount Olympus and Zeus was on it.
yep,
Same with the old Viking mythology stuff.
yep, yep, absolutely. Oh gosh, yeah, we could go into that as well. Time Prophet goes, yeah, in Shakespeare's time, women would not want to be actors. It just wasn't done. Well, yeah, it wasn't done because it was considered very improper, and for the longest time, almost up until modern times, women that were actors were looked on almost the same as prostitutes.
Also, fun fact: you can never plagiarize mythology because mythology belongs to everyone. It's public domain. So
That
if
is
you want to write a story about Zeus, go for it. You're not plagiarizing anything
mhm.
unless you copy another book written about Zeus. But you can never plagiarize an idea. You can only plagiarize the unique execution of that idea.
Yeah, because really, if you think about it, there's only so many ideas.
Yeah, and that's actually how the copyright law works. It's
Mhm.
about the um, execution of the idea.
Yeah, a similar thing happens in music. We say there's only so many keys on the keyboard. I mean, you're going to repeat phrases, intervals. Uh,
Yeah.
a good example of that, of course, is John Williams, very much inspired by that. But that's a total different ball game in conversation. And maybe sometime we could talk a little bit about myth because myth is probably the one area that I don't know jack about, especially a Viking myth. Um, I know some Greek myth, but that's just an area that I'm not very strong in. It's just not part of my territory, and I think it's very fascinating to me, that genre. And when I hear you, Stig, talk about Viking myth, especially things like Ragnarok in context with the Game of Thrones, I'm just like, dude, that sounds so cool. I just don't know, and so it's very informative.
Yeah, if it's like I said, if you read a lot of stuff on a certain subject, you'll pick.
Yeah, it'll become a part of you. Yeah, and a little bit along those lines, as we kind of start to wrap this up. Uh, I don't know if we quite talked about that quote unquote magic moment where for some reason the stars align and you are at the right place at the right time. I know that's happened to me. Maybe perhaps a little bit with you. I don't know too much, but like where you do get published, and usually it is luck, but it's also a combination of being ready when the time comes. Like if you have honed your craft, if you're ready to go, and that magic, for some reason, an opportunity lands yourself in your lap. Like I was able to say, so and so was like, "Could you give me an essay on this?" And I said yes, and I boom cranked it out and mailed it off. Within 2 days.
Yeah, uh, well, I've always liked writing and all that, and I like the idea of writing something that gets published and all that.
Hmm.
But when I got published, I was asked to do something,
Hmm.
and I wrote what they wanted me to write
Hmm.
uh, to to the best of my ability, and then it got published. So I never really felt I earned it. It was almost like it was done for me, right? Like someone telling me, "Do this, give us that," and I did it, and boom, published. So it never felt like my own stuff got published. If that makes sense,
Hmm.
it's like I did someone else's work and that got published. So yeah, I'm completely laid back about that stuff. It's yeah,
Wow. Oh, that's
I
interesting because part of me is like, well, part of me is like, absolutely, it was your work because it was your work. But I think I know what you're trying to say. You mean
yeah,
that?
because it wasn't work I would have done if nobody had asked me to do it.
Hmm.
So I guess it was like 50% my own, right? And someone edited it and paid for a cover and stuff like that, and they just did their thing with it, right?
Yeah.
But I think I would have had stronger positive feelings about it if it was something I did by myself from the get go. That was all my stuff,
Hmm.
and then it got published. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's how I feel about it, and when it comes to my situation. So
Well,
yeah,
well,
it happened. It was fun, but I I would still want to do my own thing
mhm.
and then have it happen. Does that make sense?
Oh, no, no, that makes that makes complete sense. I'm just thinking how I guess I'm not as altruistic or not as good a person, quote unquote, as you, because I was like, I don't give a frack if it was something someone else wanted me to write. I got published, babies, you know, and it led to huge things. You know what I'm saying? It did lead to then me getting to kind of do a little bit of what I wanted to do, I guess. So I was like, if you insist. But no, but I see your point for sure.
Yeah, it felt like I took a shortcut,
Mm.
I guess, or someone showed me a shortcut.
Or
And
did they show you a shortcut? Because if you hadn't done the groundwork and if you hadn't been ready at that moment, see the way I see it
yeah,
is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I just did it. I wasn't nervous or anything. I just sat down and did it step by step. You
Hmm.
know, worked on the
Yeah.
map, and then we started working on, okay, there's a river here, so odds are there's a town somewhere
Hmm.
along that river, maybe two towns.
Yeah.
Then we looked for natural ports, and I I started placing forests and stuff. And forest means lumber, right?
Hmm.
And yeah, and then I started populating the land. Who lives there? Who lives there? Are they friends? Are they not friends? Why not?
Hmm.
And yeah, I made a royal family and populated the main town and stuff like that. I
Yeah.
actually wrote lore for I think 40 different towns
Hmm.
and hotspots on the map. So I started getting, you know, writing lore and background for 10 towns were easy, but once you reach 20, it's tricky to make them all different.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it was very grindy a little bit of it.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other part. Even when writing is fun, it's hard work. And I- it, people that think it's not, or if they try to take shortcuts, we've talked a little bit about trying to take shortcuts, not to take away from self-publishing, because hey, that's a great accomplishment if that's what you're doing, and I know it's really really hard work as well. So I'm
Oh
not
yeah,
knocking
oh yeah.
that.
When you self-publish, you have a heck of an uphill battle than getting people to know about your work.
Yeah.
Because word of mouth is one thing, but every every big writer has a huge publisher behind him
Yeah.
with marketing muscles.
Yeah. Yeah. j J.K. Rowling would not have been anybody if she hadn't had her book signed. It would have been signed on to a book publishing deal. Harry Potter would still, in the Philosopher's Stone, would still just be gathering dust in her trunk or whatever, in a notebook or whatever, if
Yeah,
she
because
hadn't.
you can't love a great book if you're not aware of its existence in the first place.
Precisely. Yeah. And on the other hand, though, I do know that some people that do it, it is a labor of love when they do it. But there's also aspects of the craft that it doesn't force you to do things. It's very much like I'll sometimes get hired to do private coaching uh, for something, mainly because the parents are like, I tell the kid to do it, they won't. But I bring in a professional like me to come in and give them a few coaching sessions. It's kind of the same thing. That outside force, someone with the expertise that comes and pushes you in certain directions. Not only is it someone that helps you, but it also helps you create a better work.
Yeah. Also, one writing tip I got from someone was if you're a writer and you like being creative and stuff, you always get ideas, right?
Hmm.
and all of a sudden you'll well they can pop in anywhere really.
Hmm.
You can be doing the dishes, and all of a sudden it pops into your head a good idea. Um, those can be a bit of a trap because a lot of ideas seem great when you first get them.
Hmm.
But I find that if you put that idea away for a bit, for a
Yeah.
few days, right? And you let a few days pass, and if you can't remember that idea after a few days, most likely it wasn't a good idea to begin with.
No.
If you still remember it, it probably is a good idea
Yeah.
because it stayed.
Hmm. And also, I would also say, as a writer, be caution of hubris.
Oh
Of
yeah.
you
Oh
think.
oh yes. Golden rule. It's not about you. It's about the story.
Hmm.
I'll tell you one thing. Uh, when you're waiting for the next novel in your favorite series, you're not sitting there thinking, "Oh, I'm so happy for the writer." No, you want what's in between the book covers.
Hmm.
It's about the story. It's always about the story.
Yes.
So
I.
if you're sitting there writing a book and going, "Oh yes, people will adore me for this," no, they won't. They'll like the story.
Exactly. And also, sometimes you can be so caught up in, this is my great idea, I'm this great writer, I'm so good at what I'm doing, that you don't listen to constructive criticism.
Yeah, and I guess if you if you're sitting there writing and you're thinking about something else you'd rather be doing,
Hmm.
you should probably quit writing.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I can only think of one person who, he wrote a screenplay he was pitching for a comedy, and he asked for some insight. So he sent me the script, and I told him a few constructive tips. And he was like, "No, I believe in the integrity of my vision. It's going to stay just as it is." I remember thinking, well, then, first of all, why did you ask me for some advice? And then
Yeah,
I'm like, if you're so caught up into the integrity of your vision and you know it's perfect as it is, then you actually probably have something that's complete garbage.
yeah, and if you get constructive criticism, right,
Hmm.
listen to it and think about it, but don't let it rule you.
Yes. Yeah. And sometimes criticism is garbage, or constructive criticism. It's like, I see your point, but I actually see it this way. And you can take it or leave it. Uh, Alformo, that is a very good point. I want to put this up here. It says hubris, hubris and pride in itself is hard to avoid. Yes, it actually is, because it's a paradox. Because if you believe strongly enough, if you put yourself out there and you write this work, and you write something worth writing and something worth reading, it takes a good deal of self confidence, and is a very thin line between self confidence and pride.
Yeah, it's if you have some kind of a success, right?
Hmm.
Uh, be proud of yourself, but don't be a twat.
Put that on a t shirt, everybody.
Yeah,
Isn't that what's wrong with most of society right now? That they mistake being proud of yourself with being as you said, that word that,
yeah. I
yeah.
mean, I saw this joke the other day, and I'm not attacking groups by this though,
Hmm.
uh, but it reflects on most things. It said, what was it? A member of the LGBTQ and a vegan enters a bar,
Oh no.
and everyone knows this because they told everyone within 5 minutes.
Yes, exactly. Um, time profit. Okay, I feel like I can't in good conscience say that word live, but it rhymes with not are the best writers. Look at Stephen King.
Oh, he misspelled twats.
Okay, well, as Stig said that word, not me. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think it's spelled with
twat.
an
Twat is written with an A, not an O.
uh. Well, there we are. There we are. Poet Scotty, the Black Chosen one is here. Or, sorry, Black Chosen Orc is here. Hail all. Hello. Yes. And yes. And some people, I think, mistake the fact that Stephen King is an SOB. He most certainly is. But he's
Yeah.
also fracking brilliant.
Oh
And
yeah.
if you're as brilliant as Stephen King, you can afford to be one. But he is one in a gazillion million. Most people cannot afford to be jerks and try to be a
Just
writer.
just be yourself. Be normal.
Yes,
I mean, you're born as an original, so why try to live as a copy?
precisely. Yeah. And again, I do want to circle back. I keep circling back. That's my world is a circle. Circle back to though. Be ready when your moment comes. That's the other thing. Is if you
Yeah.
are wanting to be published, if you're not ready when your moment comes, it will pass you by. And the way I see it is it's very much like an audition, and that's happened to me too. Like where I occasionally get paid for singing and stuff. And how I got one gig was they were like, "Hey, we're looking for a singer." It's like, okay. It was at a church, and father was like, "Okay, can you sing this for me?" And I went, "La la la la." I went and sang it. He's like, "Well, sing some chant for me, Gregorian chant." I sang some Gregorian chant. He says, "Do you know this aria from this opera?" I said, "Yes, I do, father." And I sang it. He's like, "You're hired." It's the same thing.
Hmm.
So be ready if that's what you want to do.
Yeah. Be confident in what you know.
Mm-hmm, exactly. You will never, ever, people see me do what Stieg does or has done with his writing. First of all, I wouldn't even know where to start, but it's not in my heart. It's not in my soul. I don't know it. And if I even tried to, it would suck so bad. It wouldn't even be worth talking about because it's foreign to me.
I'm sure it would be better than my singing.
Possibly. But
Quite possibly.
no, well, I have some opinions on what I can do with people's voices. Just saying. But there's truth in that. But singing is not your passion. You see,
No,
it's not a part of you. Yes.
people who sit around, well, guys who sit around and sing are pansies. They need
No.
to put Rambo in the DVD player and have a beer and a pizza and sit there like a slob.
Hey,
You don't sing while watching Rambo.
that is true. Let's put that one on a T-shirt as well. Um, gosh, now I'm thinking. Yeah, put in some Rambo. That'll carry you with that. But there is very manly singing. There is. If you see an opera, a,
No, 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 no. That's not manly. AC/DC is manly.
okay, we will agree to disagree. But if you see Quando Minvo, when that baritone gets up there and bellows, that's some serious intense. But we will agree to disagree. Oh, the Time Prophet does say, "What about Viking war cries?"
That's not singing. That's a roar.
Yeah, that's true. It's the use of the voice, but it is not singing. Singing is an art, and Stephen is a craft. But that's a totally off topic. But writing is a craft. That's something that I think folks also need to get through their heads. It's a skill
Yeah,
that you can
it's
have.
a skill and a craft, same as carpentry. Words and prose are tools.
Precisely.
or rather, vocabulary and
Mhm.
prose are tools.
Yeah. And that you can have a natural gift towards something. You can have a natural gift toward storytelling and all that, but you cannot take the shortcut of skipping the tools, as you say, the tools that you need to do it, and you need to practice.
And you have to put in the work hours, and then
Yes.
some.
And it is hours and hours and hours. Some we have someone like George R. R. Martin. I didn't even know this until relatively recently that he didn't just wake up one day and like, woohoo, Game of Thrones, here's my book series. He had practically a whole career in writing television before he
Oh
published.
yeah, he had written books before that too,
Hmm.
sci-fi stuff and
Hmm.
some
Yeah.
horror books, I think. And so he didn't start off with Game of Thrones as his first book at all. He
Nope.
had been honing his skills for decades before he even thought about that.
Yeah.
So if you're new to writing, don't start off with something like that.
No.
Start off with a standalone book
Yeah. Yeah. And
that
I would even
that has
argue,
the resolution.
yes, precisely. And I would also say, don't get ambitious. Start off with a short story. I mean,
Yeah,
that's another great way to practice, as you said, y- y- rising, falling, climax, all the parts of a story and movement, as you said. Short stories are great for practicing that.
yeah. And like I said, read a lot.
Hmm.
Even read genres that you don't usually read, because there's stuff to be learned from them too.
Yeah. Yes. 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 And yes. Um. Well, I am going to start wrapping this up. I love this conversation. It's always so much fun. Always a pleasure having you as a guest, Stig. Thank you to everyone that popped in the chat. So great to see a lot of familiar faces coming in, saying hi. Of course, Deliberate Zero, Alformo Doritos. Always good to see you all the way from the future over there. And the Time Prophet, Poet Scotty. If I miss anyone's names, mea maxima culpa. Thank you, everybody. Steve does have a YouTube channel, but I don't encourage you to sub. Right, Steve? We should.
Yeah, just um, there's some silly stuff on there, and there's people seem to like the silly stuff. It's weird.
I think it's
Um,
awesome. And I was teasing. Yes, do sub to him, okay? But he always says to sub to other people instead of him.
yeah, I'm not a YouTuber, so I'm not looking for subs or views or anything. But if you want to have a look and you don't have anything better to do, sure, I'm not going to chase you away. But yeah,
He will not haunt you from Valhalla
yeah,
from in the when he reaches the afterlife. If you choose to watch his videos, I think they're quirky and fun. And his top five, if you've never experienced one of his top fives, you should.
yeah. And you can binge them all in one bathroom visit. Season one of the top five lists.
Oh my gosh. Turn it into a playlist. Okay, so yes. So when I say don't sub to Stig, of course you know that I'm not being mean. Do sub to Stig and sub to our friends. We've talked about what the sporking he does a great stuff with Game of Thrones. We have our friend, according to Christy, Tom from Midnight's Edge. Yeah.
Storio and
Oh, yep.
OG Star Wars.
Oh, of course, OG Star Wars, Alora, and she has just amazing people with amazing content. So hang in there, everyone. Be kind, be good to each other. Don't be a T with a Watt. Be good to each other. Have a very great evening, and be certain to never sniff glue.
Yeah, don't sniff glue.